It's a pleasure to have Dr. Koenraad Elst with us, and I request him to come over to the stage, please. Thank you, sir. Dr. Koenraad Elst is a very well-known person, does not need an introduction, and he's very passionate about the work that he does and has a deep sense of involvement. And not only that, his work is based on empirical evidence, and that is very important. However passionate we are, the Mahatma, uncovering God's defense. First of all, I must definitely say I was lucky to read the words of Godse, because that helps us to unravel this book better. So Godse's disposition in the court was a long disposition, and I read the whole book. In fact, when I had visited a very senior advocate in Coimbatore in Ramnagar, he was reading this book, Why I Killed Gandhi, and he suggested that I read that book. I placed an order, purchased the book, and started reading it. My wife was aghast. When she saw this book, you should throw this away. That was the first thing that she said. It's, very bad, very blasphemous. You should not be reading this book. It will bring us misfortune and ill luck. Mahatma Gandhi was a great man who got us freedom. So I had to wrap that book with a newspaper, and then I read it. It took me some time. I took a word seriously though, and for 2 or 3 days I did not read that book. I, for one, had written the Gandhi Peace Center exam during my school days in GRG Matriculation Higher Secondary School, and I have that certificate with me. And my next tryst with all this was connected with the Gandhian Study Center in a couple of educational institutions. The government of India used to offer, I think it still does offer, a 15 lakh grant over a period of 2 years for a Gandhian Study Center, Ambedkar Study Center kind of study centers, and a women's study center. Interestingly, whenever the Gandhian Study Center meeting used to take place, it was followed by the Ambedkar Study Center meeting. And there would be an intermission in between when the Ambedkar Study Center people would join the crowd for snacks. Both of them would be quarreling. The Gandhian Study Center friends and the Ambedkar Study Center friends would always quarrel. City versus village violence and this and that. It would be really interesting, and it was a very big eye-opener. This book by Dr. Koenraad Elst is a path-breaking one. We get to understand about the thought process of Godse, what were his goals, why did he kill Gandhi, and not only that, much beyond that disposition or deposition in the court, Koenraad Elst has been fair by giving an evaluation and review on the work of Godse, or on the words of Godse, and also the views of the concurrent people and the situation in India that was prevalent at that point of time. The book is a worthy read and really unputdownable. You can finish it off in just a single day, and definitely very positive in that sense. And what I understood from this was one thing that I could make out. We, from the Tamil-speaking part of the world, always quote the Tirukkural, There is one Kural which I remember, though I did Hindi as my second language. Correct me if I make any mistakes while repeating it. Idipare illada yemara mannan, kedupar illadu kedum. We need constructive criticism. Even if a ruler who does not have a constructive critic for a minister does not need an enemy. That is exactly what had taken place in the case of Mahatma Gandhi. He was a very great man, a saintly person, a devout Hindu. In 1946, not many people are aware that he visited Palani and Meenakshi Amman temples because of his religious bent of mind, and Coimbatore-based industrialist G.K. Devarajulu had driven his car at that point of time for Gandhi. Gandhi had a wonderful association with Coimbatore. He had stayed with Dr. Shanmugam Chetty in Racecourse for a week or 10 days. Then he had also inaugurated the Sri Ramakrishna Mission Vidyalaya and planted a tree in Trichy Road in Coimbatore. And our own family, we made a silver model of our house and gave it to Gandhi in 1934. Inside the house, you can see Gandhi spinning the wheel, and that was auctioned away and taken off by Koenraad family, TV brothers, for 501 rupees. So when we revere a person so much, we have to understand the reason behind the reverence, one. And number two, nobody is above criticism and a debate. India is a country which is known as the Vishwaguru, and it is known for its debate and dialogue. Unfortunately, Koenraad Elst sir will agree that we become passionate, religious-minded people and are involving ourselves lesser and lesser in debate. Yeah. And in this case, it is healthy to have a debate about the thought process of Godse and the antecedents of Gandhi. He has explained who the Chitpavan Brahmins were. I think it would be better that he explains it himself. And who the famous ones were in the 20th century, Tilak and Gokhale. And in the 18th century, they were the Peshwas, Balaji Vishwanath Bajirao, Balaji Bajirao. Then, of course, Madhavrao Peshwa and whoever came later. So they were the ones who defined India as it was in the 18th century, and it was from them did the East India Company take over the country and not from the Mughals as it is popularly believed. So I have this, what made you choose this topic?
Well, let's start at the very beginning. So, you see, many people ask me, how did I get into Hindu studies? And so let's start as far as I can remember, because it did not seem predestined or something. My parents were very firm and devout Catholics. There was nothing particularly with India. Then again, my father, already before it was common, started with Hatha Yoga, simply for health reasons, while he was not a Hindu at all. But I didn't know about Hatha Yoga until later. Maybe I already knew about the existence of yoga, but my first confrontation on site with it was when watching at 5 years old a TV serial for children. We only just had our first new TV, and it was some sort of a detective series, and the detective, Captain Zeppos, has to question a certain woman. He goes to her place, he knocks on the door, she's not there, but then he sees that the door is not really closed, he goes in, and there she is, standing on her head. Now, I didn't know at that time, but that was in fact the reenactment of a very famous photograph, namely of our Queen Widow, Queen Elizabeth, who was the widow of King Albert, who was Belgian king at the time of the First World War. So he died, he fell from a rock that he was climbing in 1935. And so she stayed alive for like a half a century more. And she did yoga as a pupil of B.K.S. Iyengar. And so that's why she learned everything. And so one day a newspaper made big news by showing this photograph of her, 80-something years old. And so yeah, so that's how I came to know about Hindu culture for the first time. The second event was my father in his childhood had collected photographs that you received for free if you bought certain materials in what was then the equivalent of the supermarket. And so once Hindu culture, so you had scenes there from the Vedas, from the Mahabharata, like for instance, a less well-known scene from the Mahabharata is when the Pandavas are in exile in the forest, and there, as even most Hindus apparently don't know, they were cared for because they had the boon of a copper kettle that automatically produced the food that they needed, ready-made. So that was depicted there. Everything from Indian history, not just Hindu, like Emperor Jahangir and stuff like that. Anyway, but so they were very beautiful. You see, they stuck in my mind. I thought, wow, this has something. Then I must have been 18 when I bought a book, really more because of its cover than because of what I knew. It's called Text. It was an English translation of the 13 principal Upanishads by a certain Hume, famous Orientalist from 1930 thereabouts. And so this was the text of the Upanishads. And I was very impressed. Nevertheless, when I started studying Orientalism, my first choice was Chinese studies. And it's then, you see, when I started knowing about this philosophy that I realized that Indian philosophy is actually more fundamental. It goes deeper. So I studied that also. I studied Chinese, Sanskrit, Persian, a little bit of Hindi, and I've never properly got down my Hindi. You see, if I give a talk in English in Varanasi or in Bhopal or so, I start with, my broken Hindi and apologizing for giving a speech in English. Here, unfortunately, I can't even do that. I ought to have started by saying Vanakam, but that's about the whole of my knowledge. Okay, so so I studied that stuff. I was at the end of my studies. I was not planning to come to India at all because the 1 year of my studies I had been plagued with a chronic disease that came back for more than a year. And so at that time I thought, in India, that's the place of malaria and cholera and leprosy and so on. And I don't have a Mother Teresa with me, so you see, I thought this is not necessary to go there. I mean, you see, Western philosophers who study Immanuel Kant, who was from Königsberg or present-day Kaliningrad, they never go there. They don't think that to know Kant you have to know what his living circumstances were. People who study Plato and Aristotle don't necessarily go to Greece. I studied them, I've never been to Greece. But then through circumstances, nevertheless, I went to India anyway, and then it was love at first sight. So the first day, I was very tired. It was a difficult flight, with stopovers and so on. I was very tired. So the first day I wasn't like aware enough to really resist the cheaters that I met on Zandpad, where all the first-time tourists arrive. So I lost quite a bit of money to some soothsayer. Um, and what he said was totally worthless. And that, of course, in fact, is something that would remain with me whenever I came back to India. Very often, when I stay with a family, they offer me to also see their family astrologer. So my Indian horoscope has been made at least 5 times, and I must say, honestly, I'm not too impressed with the results. Nobody has ever predicted anything that really happened. So, which means, of course, that that slot is still open. If any of you knows an astrologer that can really predict my future, then, I'll be grateful. Um, but you see, otherwise, Hindu philosophy really is good. And so I knew a few philosophers personally, like my supervisor in the HU, I studied there for a year, Kedarnath Mishra, of full memory, or Professor Daya Krishna, who was a friend of Sitaram Goel, who was really the man who opened my eyes to the reality of Hindu existence in India. Um, So it has everything. However, I didn't pursue Hindu philosophy because when I was in Varanasi, I also followed the news here, and this was quite a surprise, quite a revelation. You see, every day I went to the newspaper shop and I bought a few newspapers, and then I went to the riverside of the Ganga on Asi Ghat, and my daily ritual, I rolled up my trousers, put out my shoes and socks, and went to stand with my feet in the mud. Uh, because at the time I believed that this was a healthy thing to do. And so it must have been quite a sight for the people there. But anyway, it was a sort of a holy dip in Ganga, as they say. And there I read my newspapers. And so I noticed the news about the then freshly starting Ayodhya affair. And there was a newspaper in UP at the time, Aaj. This much of India I knew. I mean, I would read the headlines of Ayodhya, this and that. And then, the Times of India and Frontline. That was the paper I absolutely loved. This is from Tamil Nadu, as you know. It was also a communist paper. Nevertheless, it was well made. At the time, most Indian papers were very shabby looking. Also, if they were newspaper, it was often not in good English, full of mistakes and so on. And so if they use bad language, it suggests bad thinking, you see. So I was not too impressed, but anyway, they were a source of information. So at the time, you see, I noticed, especially in Frontline, it was spun out over many pages, a debate in the secularist camp about an affair that was then just making headlines, the Salman Rushdie affair. Don't know if you remember, this was 1808, autumn of 1988. It was the first time in India. And so there were the hard secularists, the communists, who sided with Salman Rushdie against the Ayatollahs who had sentenced him. And, or first of all, against Syed Shahabuddin, the Indian politician who had arranged to get the book prohibited. the book The Satanic Verses. So the communists took a normal secularist position. Oh, we are against religious obscurantism. We are in favor of freedom of speech. By contrast, many secularists, the type of Veer Sangvi, of M.J. Akbar, the later BJP ideologue, of Khushwant Singh at the time, they argued in favor of the ban. They sided with the Syed Shahuddin and ultimately with the Ayatollahs, Sartan Se Juda. So I thought this was bizarre. I thought, it is like obvious that secularists will side with this free-thinking writer against the obscurantists. No, in India, secularism meant something else. So all these Western India watchers who pontificated India as a secular state and so on, it turned out that they were wrong. Yeah, so that's what I devoted a few books to just analyzing how India is not a secular state. So you see, then I saw, oh yeah, this all this philosophy, that's for when I'm like 63 as I am now. Let's do something more relevant in life. So I decided to go deeper into this communal situation, which is quite interesting, I dare say. In fact, Ramachandra Guha once came on a visit to my home university, Leuven, Belgium, and there he said that India is the most interesting country in the world, and I agree. I've been to America, I've been to China, and so on. They have something, but they're nothing like India.
I haven't.
Okay.
That was really interesting. I know somebody who's related to Ramachandra Guha, and unfortunately is not in town today.
Mm-hmm.
There's a friend called Mr. Sundar Ramachandran from Chennai.
Yeah.
So, that was very interesting to look at the background of your coming up and how you came across the yoga posture through a TV serial, and about your own queen and king. Now, coming to this book,
Yes.
You have placed the argument of Godse, and along with that, you have brought in a number of other interesting people who are thinkers, thought leaders of the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, why did I write this book? You see, when on Twitter I refer to this book, I get many Hindu, let's say, chauvinists who say, "Well, what was there to write about that book? Isn't that book itself, the publication of Godse's own speech, isn't that good enough?" Well, you see, that's a fairly common disease here, that they just set up that book for worship. Now we know it. Now it has been revealed. We have Godse's speech, and that's it. Well, that's not how history works. Godse gave his speech, which is indeed quite good, but not complete. So he gave that in 1949, and not 1948, sorry. And many things have happened since then. And we know a lot more about the circumstances in which he functioned, more than he himself did. So I think there are quite a few new things to say about it. And then, even apart from everything that came later, you see, if you look at it simply from the viewpoint of 1948, there are already a number of things that are not mentioned in his speech, even though they have already happened, such as, for example, immediately after the murder, there was a government crackdown on all the Hindu forces, including the RSS, which were not involved, including the Hindu Mahasabha, which also was not involved, but of which he was a member. And of course, even the Hindu Mahasabha would not be so stupid as to shoot themselves in the foot by committing this murder. This is very much an individual initiative. But so, nevertheless, there was not just this crackdown that could have been foreseen. What people did not expect was the enormous pogrom of Maharashtrian Brahmins that took place. So I found sources like Arati Agarwal who put this, who estimate a death toll of 8,000. Now, I don't know if that's true. But the only paper that I know that reported on it is, oddly, the New York Times. And so they estimated 1 day after the murder that in Mumbai there had been at least 15 people killed. But you see, they had also heard already that there was violence erupting in what is it called, Hapur and Pune and a number of Maharashtrian cities. And it didn't stop after day one. So it's obvious that the death toll is much higher, but how high, I don't know. And I don't know if we ever will know, because I'm sure that the records, the police records of this have been destroyed. But so maybe some escape destruction, if a good historian goes deeper into someone like Vikram Sampot, then we may find out more. I think anyway, this program took place. The best known person who fell victim to it is the younger brother of V. Savarkar. So he was wounded, and then a few weeks later he died from his wounds. So he had been actively involved in the freedom struggle for decades. This is how he was tanked. And so some of this killing was, let's say, motivated by caste, being the OBCs, who in Maharashtra are the heirs of Shivaji, who settled an old score against the Shitpavan Brahmins, who had furnished the Peshwas, who took over from Shivaji's family. So that there's a revenge feeling that has never really stopped. But partly it's also simply Gandhians, Congressites who took revenge. And this you can best compare with a very similar case of the murder of Indira Gandhi in 1984 by a Sikh bodyguard, followed by a pogrom on the Sikhs in general, committed by her own party workers, by the secularist Congressites. And so that had some 4,000 people killed, fewer than this in Maharashtra, but okay, it's a similar scenario. And so, you see, I am not sure that Godse felt as sure about the justification of his case if he had known that it would have this consequence. Now, of course, it's not he who committed this pogrom, it's precisely his enemies who did. But still, it's a bad feeling, and I wouldn't like it. Then, the arguments given by Godse himself, a number of them are unstable. You see, when he criticizes Mahatma Gandhi, that's very to the point. Those remaining Gandhians will have a very hard time refuting those. But then some are also totally beside the point, or are just wrong. Like, for instance, he calls Gandhi the father of Pakistan. Well, it's a bit more complicated than that. Gandhi had always opposed the idea of Pakistan. However, he did not have the courage of his conviction, because in June 1947 he crossed the floor. He went over to the camp that accepted partition, which in the preceding months a number of congressmen had done, starting I think with Rajesh Govindarajulu, Morarji Desai, and Nehru, of course, who was hand in glove with Mountbatten, and who had arrived in India in March 47, and he was totally ready for the partition. Whereas the preceding viceroy, Lord Wavell, had opposed the partition. You see, many Indians think, oh, it's the British who imposed the partition on us. That's Congress propaganda. You see, first of all, they take pride in having made India independent from the British, which is self-flattery that downplays the role of the revolutionaries of Subhash Bose. And secondly, this part of their propaganda that there's nothing wrong with the Indian Muslims. So to face the fact that it is Indian Muslims who had chosen for partition, who had engineered partition, who had made partition almost inevitable by their violence, like in Noakhali and in Kolkata, great Kolkata killing. So that the Congress doesn't want to have said. So they say, oh, it's the British who imposed this. No, the British were against partition very firmly. You see, in their view of things, it is they who had created India. You see, their idea is that India was always fragmented, and so there were a few attempts to unite it, like by Ashoka, whom they say is a Buddhist and therefore not a Hindu. This is also bad history anyway. That's how they saw it. And then by the Mughals, and from whom they had taken over India, again in their telling. They discount the role of the Marathas. But so, they thought, okay, it's only under Queen Victoria that for the first time ever, India has become a political unit. It's we who created India. And therefore, they were in no mind to see India fragmented again. And so Lord Wavell said it explicitly, we will not consider partition even if we have to let go of India. You know, we have it in one unit and we want to keep it that way. And it also made good economic sense, like you had the whole railway net, which, you know, crosses these frontiers that had been created in partition. You have the, you know, the economic coherence, like the famous example, the jute mills in Kolkata and the raw jute production in what is now Bangladesh. So the British were against partition, and they also crossed the floor. You see, after the great Calcutta killing, they started wondering, you know, is it worth, you know, all this violence? Should we not just accept that partition has become inevitable? Now, about that, the British were unsure, but Mountbatten was quite sure. He sailed with the winds, you see, and he saw where it was going, so he was in favor. One thing you can blame the British for is that they did not contain the violence of partition. You see, if they had mobilized their troops to go to all the hotspots, to Lahore and so on, to contain the violence, that would have made an enormous difference. Simply seeing in your streets the sight of a British army would have dissuaded numerous people from committing violence. Because, like in Lahore, for example, Hindus were killed not by some armed Muslim militia, no, they were killed by their neighbors, who the other day had promised them, we will protect you. And so, if they had seen, oh, the British are there, you know, then they wouldn't have started it. So that way you see a great deal of loss of life can be blamed on the British. However, partition cannot. So many people walked over to the side of the partition, ultimately including Mahatma Gandhi. Now, this was unforgivable because he had specifically promised partition over my dead body. That is exactly what he had said. And so all these Hindus in Lahore and in Dhaka and so on, they counted on him. They thought, okay, nothing is going to happen because there's the Mahatma Gandhi. Who will dare to oppose him? And then he let all these people down. So yes, he is to a large extent responsible for all the killing that took place. You know, I suppose I don't need to inform you of the killing that took place, but maybe to give an idea, in the 90s, I interviewed the two surviving members of the conspiracy by 7 people of the murder which Naturam Gose executed. And so one of them was the brother, Gopal Gose, and the other was Madan Lal Pahal, who had a shop at the time in Mumbai. So I went there to interview him. And so he told me his story, which is quite boring. So he was a member of a family of 22 living in what was to become West Pakistan. And so they decided to flee to India. And not far from them was a train station, so they were going to take the train to India. However, his old aunt, who was from like a past age, she didn't trust all this modern technology. So she wanted to walk to India or take a bullock cart or something. And this Manalal Bahma, as a young lad, to him was assigned the job of, you see, looking after our old aunt. So they together went to India by old-fashioned means, all the rest went by train. And they agreed to meet in some train station on the Indian side of the border. So they went there. What turned out? Yes, the train had arrived. Yes, they were in the train, but everybody in the train had been killed. See, so that was the reality of partition. Family of 22, of whom 20 are killed. So, what did Mahatma Gandhi have to say to that? You know, all the refugees from Lahore, from Multan and so on arrived in Delhi, and he told them, and he's not me inventing this, there are a number of quotations in this sense already given in Freedom at Midnight. You know, that book by these French journalists.
Dominic Lapierre.
Yes. So he told them, well, it's dishonorable to flee from your place. You should go back to Pakistan. And if you get killed, well, it's more honorable to get killed by your brothers, the Muslims, rather than to flee dishonorably. So he was telling them, you know, after they had lost everything, he was telling them, oh, but you still have your life. Come on, go give your life. I mean, this is madness. You know, being told such a thing, there's nothing saintly about it. This is just mad. So yes, you see, there were reasons to be angry at Gandhi. So he was not as guilty as Naturam Gose thought, but he was pretty guilty nevertheless. And so you see, that is unacceptable. There you can, you know, judge Gose's case. In a few senses, he's exaggerating the case against Gandhi, but basically he's right. However, does it follow from that Gandhi should be murdered? So you see, he says, yes, my blood boiled. I thought this man must die. Well, it's not really a good Hindu thing to act in an emotional state. You know, like for instance, why is sati dissuaded already in the Rig Veda? You see, in the Rig Veda, you have a scene where widow self-immolation is described, but it doesn't happen because the woman is dissuaded from doing so. You know, she's told, okay, this man, you know, he loved people and he was part of life and so on, and all that is over. So he's going to the other world. But you have a life ahead of you. You count for many people, you know. They are now already grieving for him. Don't let them grieve for you. And please come back. And so she's led away from the funeral party. Okay? Now, why is that? You see, one reason, of course, is that it's silly to die for that, you know. But more importantly, it's silly to take such a momentous decision in the emotional state you are in within 24 hours of your husband dying. And so generally, you see, it's a very unhindered thing to do, to act in anger or in fear or something. You see, first calm down, look at everything, you know, calmly, and then decide. And so, maybe your blood boils, okay, well then let it unboil first, and then think of what you're going to do. So, what did God say do? You see, yes, you see, he took revenge on Gandhi, but at the same time, he made Gandhi immortal. You see, at the time, 1948, the star of Mahatma Gandhi was going down, down, down. Uh, First of all, because of partition, which he had promised to prevent, which he hadn't prevented. You know, he was the man of non-violence, but look how many people had been killed. So he was very much losing his credibility. Then after independence, he fasted unto death to and force the Indian government to pay a part of the treasury to the Pakistani treasury. So he hadn't fasted unto death to force Jinnah against partition. That he had failed to do. And then now he could again fast unto death in favor of Pakistan. Hmm? So that made Godse's blood boil. Okay, yeah, I think it's quite scandalous. This man who fasted unto death 17 times ultimately needed a bullet to get dead. Hmm? Um, but so the one time that fasting unto death really contained the risk of dying, because it's unlikely that Jinnah would have backed down. You see, and then he had to fast unto actual death. That one time he refused to fast unto death. See, so yes, you see, there is a heavy case against Gandhi, but since he was already losing his shine, why kill him? This made him immortal. Why is Gandhi still untouchable? And I mean untouchable in the sense of unassailable. Well, because he's a martyr. And apart from what happened to Gandhi, is something even more important. You see, this is what happened to India. If he thought that the Hindu movement was the answer for India, then this is the last thing he should have done. Because the Hindu movement at the time had the wind in the sails. You see, Congress and Gandhi had been discredited by their failure to stop partition. And so the Hindu movement had correctly agitated against partition, had correctly predicted you can't trust Congress and so on. So they were doing well. Now that changed overnight with the murder. Then suddenly the whole Hindu movement was back to square one. And all the leaders were imprisoned, all their books were impounded and so on. The Hindu Mahasabha effectively disappeared or became totally marginalized. They had to form the new party and start again from a few seats in parliament, totally marginal. So you see, all this was unnecessary. And indeed, it has effects till today. Um, why, um, why didn't the BJP own up the Ayodhya demolition? Well, of course, first of all, because truthfully, they had not engineered the Ayodhya demolition. That was done by the Bajrang Dal on the spot. Even Ashok Singhal, the BHP leader, tried to stop them. You know, they threatened, we'll pull off your dhoti if you don't shut up. And you see, L.K. Advani started crying on the spot when he saw the fabled RSS discipline break down and so on. But so the BJP didn't want to look radical, take responsibility. Why? Because they have this collectively, the whole movement has this psychology, oh, we should absolutely avoid a scenario like in 1948. And so there's a repeated thing in the history of the BJP, RSS, that they back down, that they don't dare to be seen as radical because they know, oh, in 1948, we didn't even do anything radical, only one of us did. And look what the enormous negative effect was. So, for the anti-Hindu forces, the shooting of Gandhi was a great victory, was a godsend. They had not asked for it, they had probably not thought of it, but it happened, and the advantage for them was enormous and long term. So you see, that's why I think you can't just hold up God's speech and say this is divine revelation. No, you see, there are aspects to it that do deserve a thorough analysis. And then you see that the book is not as evil as the secularists say, but is not as good as some Hindu enthusiasts think. So it's a bit of both, and so it takes a mature historian to lay that out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elst. This is exactly what I found when I read the book because it had a very balanced view. I was quite surprised to learn that about 25,000 people were jailed after the killing of Gandhi. A very big number.
Yeah.
And also the partition deaths. You have put it conservatively at 600,000, but there are people who talk about a few million.
Yeah,
The numbers are very difficult to determine. Yeah. And also, you've spoken about Suravati.
Yeah.
If you look at the movie Gandhi, towards the end of the movie, you would see the scene, Nokli and Suravati and the word Shaheed. Everything comes there. The book is a very compelling read, and rightfully, these kind of political killings do not serve practical purposes. That I fully agree with Dr. Koenraad Elst. There have been other political killings the world over, including whatever happened in India in 1991, the killing of Rajiv Gandhi.
Yeah.
It did not result in anything for anybody. So finally, these political killings are completely avoidable and not very practical. Sometimes
about that, I don't know how you Tamils feel about this Tamil Ilam, but at any rate, it didn't bring Tamil Ilam closer. The Tamil movement also, suffered as a consequence, I dare say.
So it's like most of the political killings, however logical they are, Gandhi probably, had he lived for a few more years, he may have had a fight with the Congress party and with the. It's speculative, but knowing Gandhi, maybe a couple of more fasts would have taken place.
Yeah.
17 fasts already. I remember reading about the Aga Khan Palace fast, where the sugar level was going up, in the words of Churchill, but Gandhi was continuing to fast. And that looked very mysterious. So this book is very interesting, and I'm really grateful to Dr. Koenraad Elst on behalf of all of us. I thank him for being here with us and also for giving a very balanced view. And this is a subject which is like, an untouchable subject. Even today, if somebody talks about Gandhi, they start getting worried. In spite of the fact that India is a Vishwaguru, which is supposed to have worked on debates, where when you look at the Brahma Sutra, there are 24 interpretations of the Brahma Sutra, they say. They get into interesting debates, supporting and opposing. But yet, Gandhi seems to have been above all that. And hats off to Dr. Elst for giving us this opportunity to go through this wonderful debate. And I thank him for being with us today. And I thank the friends who brought him to us today. Thank you so much, sir.